system or monetary system is called a fractional reserve banking system. So I'm going to share with you what this system is and how it works, specifically how it works to create money. Once you understand this fractional reserve banking system, you will understand why the rich get richer and the poor don't, or the poor keep staying where they're at or keep getting poorer. Okay, so to highlight the banking system, we're going to follow a $100 bill. So assuming you don't spend this $100 bill, most of us will put it in a bank. Now, the bank has $100 in its reserve. Now, the bank doesn't make money by holding your $100. The bank makes money by lending. So there's a rule in banking, in our fractional reserve banking system, that says you have to have a certain percentage held in reserve in order for you to lend out the money. So let's say, for simplicity's sake, the reserve ratio is 10%. And that's why it's called a fractional reserve banking system, because there's a fraction, a percentage, that must be kept on reserve in a bank. So let's say the reserve ratio is 10%. This means this bank now has to keep 10% of the $100 in its vaults and can lend out 90% or 90 bucks. So now the bank finds Joe. The bank goes out and finds Joe, who needs a $90 loan. And the bank loans $90 because it has to keep $10 in its reserve, and it lends $90 to Joe. Joe's now happy, he's got 90 bucks. Joe then uses 90 bucks to buy stuff, and then he pays the 90 bucks to the seller of that stuff. Now, assuming the seller doesn't spend that $90, what does the seller do with that $90? Puts it back in the bank, and it could even be the same bank. Now the bank has a new $90 in its reserve, and as long as it keeps 10% or 9 bucks, it can loan out the balance, which is $81, and it can loan it out to Sally. Sally needs 81 bucks to buy diapers or other stuff. Sally then takes that $81 and buys stuff, diapers, from the seller. And again, assuming the seller doesn't spend that $81, what do you think the seller does with the 81 bucks? You got it. Puts it into a bank. Now the bank has $81 in reserve and can loan out another $72.90. Ladies and gentlemen, this happens every day, all day, any day. Okay? And this continues on and on. So if you look at it, the commercial bank balance sheet, if you were to look at any commercial bank's balance sheet, you would see the initial $100 in reserves, makes a loan, and because it's earning interest, that $90 loan is now an asset. And then that $90 that got paid to Joe makes its way back into the reserves of the bank again. So the bank can count it as another $90 in reserve and can loan out and create another asset of 81 bucks. And then to Sally, Sally takes that 81 bucks, deposits it, and now the bank can loan out another $72.90. This process, ladies and gentlemen, can go on and on and on and on. And it does. This process continues right to the very last penny. And when it does, when you add up the last penny in both columns, what happens is that initial $100 balloons to the tune of $2,000 of money supply. So that initial $100 by this fractional reserve banking system turns into $2,000 of extra supply of money. Now, that's assuming a 10% reserve ratio. It's actually less. Let's say instead of 10%, it's a 1% reserve ratio. Well, now that $100, instead of turning into $2,000 through the fractional reserve banking system, turns into $20,000. This is what is actually called inflation. When you hear the word inflation, it's not just the inflation in the price. What inflation refers to is the inflation of the number of dollars in supply as money. That's actually the hidden truth behind the term inflation. Okay? So that's how the fractional reserve banking system works, and that's actually how currency and money is created in our system, our monetary system. You might be asking, well, who cares? What the heck does this have to do with me? Well, let's hone in and focus in on inflation, and let's create an example here. Money supply inflation using an example. Let's say all of us who are on this webinar are sitting in a life raft, okay? And we know we're going to be rescued in about 2 or 3 days. Before our boat sank. I grabbed a bag of oranges and I've been secretly eating them. Now that I know we're going to be rescued in 2 days, I don't mind being nonchalant and I pull out an orange. And I'm about to peel my last orange, and then all of a sudden one of you says to me, "Hey, Glenn, don't eat that orange. I'll give you a loonie for that orange." Now, because I know we're going to be rescued, I'm like, well, I'm really sick of oranges anyways. I might as well trade it, take the loonie, because I can use that loonie to buy something when I'm back on land. If I were to do that, what has just happened is we've just fixed the price of that orange equal to $1. So I'm about to make the trade to one of you, but then a second person in our life raft, another one of you says, "Hey, stop, Glenn, don't sell it to him or her for $1. Sell it to me and I'll give you $5. Now, of course, to me, $5 is better than $1. So I say sold and I sell it to the second person for $5. Now, that's a very simple exercise, but let's take a look at the implications of what just happened. You see, because nothing has changed about the orange itself. It's not like the time between I was about to give it to one person for a loonie to the time I was about to give it away for $5. Nothing changed about the orange. I didn't download an app and upgrade that orange. No, the orange is the orange. It stayed the same. Nothing has changed about the value of the orange. The only thing that has changed is the amount of money in the life raft being used to buy the one orange. So what has happened is this. It's the increased amount of money being used in the economy, or in our case, the life raft, with no increase in supply of goods and services, or the oranges, that causes inflation. It's so critical, we're going to review in slow motion. So remember, orange equals $1. But then when the other person brought out a $5 bill, it stopped being worth $1. It started being worth $5. But instead of representing it as a $5 bill, let's represent it as 5 loonies. Now, to make this equation equivalent, and we know nothing has changed about the value of the orange, to make this equation equivalent, the value of what had to have changed? Just type it out in the chat. What value had to have changed? If nothing changed about the orange, to make this equation equivalent, what had to change? That's right, some of you guessed it. The value of each individual loonie had to have changed. So when $5 was introduced in the life raft to be exchanged for the orange, what happened was, in that moment, each loonie dropped to 1/5 the value of the pre-sale loonie. Okay, you really want to get this. Now, when I exchange the loonie for that, when I exchange the orange for the 5 loonies, what that meant was immediately the value of the loonie prior to the $5 being introduced had to have dropped to 1/5 the value. Said in another way, from this example, as the money supply increases, the value of each individual loonie or unit of money has to decrease. So every time, here's the point, every time you hear things like quantitative easing or keeping interest rates low, I invite you to understand that all that means is the fractional reserve banking system is ramping up and printing more and more money. Now, as that happens, ladies and gentlemen, as the printing press for the currencies start ramping up and going higher and higher, what that means to you is every dollar that's sitting in your bank account is losing value. Every dollar in your bank account becomes worth less and less and less and less. Unless you have a powerful strategy for your money to earn a rate of return that is higher than the rate at which it's being diminished in value, unless you have a powerful strategy for that, your money will become worth less, less, and less, and eventually it may become worth less. And that's not some far-reaching theory that could never happen. You know, that's happened in certain countries. The latest one was in Argentina in the early, mid-2000s. The one before that was former Yugoslavia prior to the turn of the millennium. And then everybody always knows about the German inflation when, each paper mark was worth less than a scrap piece of paper. So this happens every time in in currencies and economies. And the reason why I share that to you is you have to understand the rules of the monetary game if you want to have any shot at producing real sustainable generational wealth. Okay? So let's take a look at what strategy we at 1+12 employ with ourselves and our financial partners and clients to ensure that our money or our working capital grows faster than the rate of inflation, so that even if money supply is being inflated and each of our dollars are becoming worth less and less, we know that our money is being put to good use so that it earns a profit greater than the rate of inflation.